Welcome back to another episode of STEM in Stilettos. This is your host, Zofia Morales, and today I am here with an engineer who found her wings. And I will introduce her shortly, but first I would like to introduce you to your own self and invite you, grab your pen, grab your piece of paper, to take a quiz called the Leadership Pitfall Quiz, and it will give you insights into what your current leadership style is. You can go to leadershippitfallquiz.com, ask a 60 seconds worth of 60 seconds worth of questions, and find out what your current leadership style is, as well as the pros and the cons of having that style in your life. So that's leadershippitfallquiz.com. And we will be discussing Rosie's results on this quiz later on today. So you would probably find it helpful to know what your results are as well. So you can play along at home. So our guest today is Rosie Pongracz. She has been called an engineer's marketer. She's an engineer by training and a builder by nature. A full stack technical marketer by practice, she has applied her engineering approach to bringing technology to market across startup companies, open source, and major corporations, including the likes of IBM, Salesforce, Intel, and Carl Zeiss. She has launched over 50 products and companies. She has 20 plus years of experience tinkering with all things platform for cloud, data, AI, machine learning, identity of things, or should that be Internet of Things, mobile. And Rosie is on the board of NumFocus, a nonprofit that supports open source projects for scientific computing. Her passions are everything STEM education, diversity in tech, and animal welfare. She is an instrument-rated pilot, an underwater photographer, and a sci-fi junkie. Rosie has a BS in electrical and biomedical engineering from Carnegie Mellon. Welcome, Rosie. I'm so excited to have you here to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Zofia, for having me.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a fabulous conversation. I think with a lot of women, there's always this question of, what got you hooked on the science and technology train, right? Because we're of an age where I know for myself, my parents were like, you don't want an erector set. You want a Barbie. And I'm like, no, I want an erector set. So what got you started down that road?
First, that totally is me. I never liked dolls. I did like Barbies only because there was a Barbie plane. Remember back then though, she was a stewardess, but anyways,
but with a change
is
of
a
clothes,
builder.
she's a pilot.
That's right. And I love the Tinker Toys, which remember back in the day, can you imagine those little broken sharp pieces? And
Oh yeah.
anyways, but I love to build and I wanted the cars and the sandbox and building tunnels and things. But what got me hooked, my first memory, really, one of my first memories is watching the moonwalks with my dad on TV.
Yes. Oh
Yes.
my goodness, the amazingness that they can be out there in that vacuum of space and surviving and doing all this cool stuff and bouncing and oh.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think I ever stopped asking why. That always annoys the parents, but perpetually why. I've always been good at math and I love the beauty of math. I love the open-endedness and curiosity of science. So I think all of that, I had luckily parents who were focused on education, especially my mom, an example. And that was just it. It was a focus on learning and asking why a lot.
Yes, and designing ways to find out the answer to why, right? Because a lot of
Yes.
times your parents don't immediately have at their fingertips why the sky is blue, but there are ways to find out why the sky is blue.
Yes, we had an encyclopedia set too, actually, that I referred to so many times, many library visits, and I built stuff with my dad, including solar projects and solar ovens when we lived in Arizona, and heating water with the sun. Arizona has a lot of sun, so that builder part of me was always there and trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, that's marvelous. So, how did you decide that engineering was your direction? Was it that building aspect?
I really didn't know what an engineer was. Like my parents both were not college educated, though I say my mom got her degree when I was getting mine, which was no small feat those days, and
Yeah.
working full time. But I love math and science. And just by chance, somehow, an astronaut, a real astronaut, a female astronaut, came to speak at some event that I was lucky enough to be at. Her name was Judith Resnick.
Oh, wow.
And she had an engineering degree. And at that point, I was considering Carnegie Mellon. She went to Carnegie Mellon. She had a biomedical degree. And it wasn't until, as we all know, she was lost in the tragedy
Yeah.
of, of this
Challenger, wasn't it?
was it Challenger? Yeah, I think it was the Challenger. I should know this. But anyways, so that broke my heart. But her spirit, and just I have a handwritten note that she sent to me afterwards after I talked to her. And that just inspired me. It's so true that you have to see someone doing
That looks
something that
like
you
you.
that looks like
Yeah.
you, that you can imagine. And I only reread the article my mother cut out from the Wall Street Journal recently, and I still have it, the graying
Yeah.
piece of paper that said, a pilot with the looks of a stewardess. So they
There
wrote
you
that in the
go.
Wall Street Journal back then. Anyways, I
Yeah.
didn't,
Well,
yeah.
I love that. But the thing that I'd like to pull forward is the influence that personal note had on you
Ah,
after the meeting, because this is like a lesson in mentorship and setting examples for other women and other diverse persons who are coming into something that's so heavily male dominated, like science and technology. The importance of pulling people behind you and acknowledging their interest and encouraging their interest. And just that simple thing, it probably took her 10 minutes to sit down and pen out that little note and put a stamp on it. And it changed how you saw your future.
oh, absolutely. It's one of my most treasured things, like physical things, because of her, because of the impression that she made upon me that this was possible. And that she actually, like you said, took the time. In those days, sending mail was a little more common, but still to have that signature. And she sent me a little brochure with it. And Carnegie Mellon is a great school. Good luck, and all that. And yeah, it did definitely change my trajectory quite a bit.
I love that. And it's a very simple action that had a profound effect. And I have no doubt that she had no idea how impactful that would truly be for you.
I know. Gosh, I wish she was around. I actually went to Cleveland to visit a friend, and they have a whole Case Western, because that was, I think, her undergrad. Carnegie was her
Her
graduate.
gratitude.
They
Yeah.
have whole monuments and buildings because she went to Case Western. So that was nice, coming full circle.
Yeah, cool to see that
Hmm.
acknowledgement and recognition of the path making that she's been doing.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, absolutely.
that's beautiful. So, how did you discover that engineering was going to be your thing? You became aware of it through this interaction with her.
I was looking for science and math. Now I thought about medical because that was the only other science that was really in my head that I could do. Like, I could be a doctor. My best friend was
Yeah.
going to be a doctor, is a very successful doctor. But I wanted to do something with math. And that's where I started talking to people, because that's the other thing. I think you have to think of going back to asking questions, ask the questions at that time, do the research in the library or talk to other people. I have to say my high school counselor wasn't very much help, but I had at least a community around me that I could ask and go, yeah, engineering, math and science. And I knew that was a path, a career. I could make a career of it too.
Yeah.
And I think I still just love to build. So I go
Well,
back to,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I love the advice of just putting your toe into different things and testing how it fits. I think medicine is a common one for women to go down because we're encouraged to be nurturing and this sort of thing. I know I went down the pre-med path quite a long ways before I ended up in what they now call biophysics. They didn't call it that when I went into it, which is the juxtaposition of microbiology and like huge magnets.
Yeah.
And so my original reaction when I was in my first biology class was, oh, this is it. This is it
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
It wasn't, as it turned out, like the final answer, but it was a really strong step down that road, because prior to that, I was considering a lot of things that I was told were appropriate for me to consider. I was
Hmm.
considering becoming a CPA, and I was considering becoming an interpreter, like of language at the UN kind of thing. But that biology class changed everything for me.
To understand what you could do, what the possibilities are. And that's what I think was so helpful. And it's interesting because you mentioned medical medicine for women, and I have a few good friends who are doctors. But yeah, I look at the profession, and it's like 40% of of doctors are women now, which I think is amazing. But you look at things
Yes.
like engineering, pilots, which we'll
Yeah.
talk about later.
Pilots, computer
It's
programmers, and
pilots,
yeah.
7%, and that's not professional. Professional is actually lower. But then you look at something in engineering and computer and tech, and the engineers in that is still like hovering around 25 or so percent. There's still something going on there that I feel very strongly that we need to address as those mentors, the generation who can help lift up the others for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I find it interesting that ultimately you took your highly technical training in engineering and morphed into marketing, which I find absolutely fascinating, because there's this psychology that goes along with marketing that seems at odds on the surface, but is so critically important, especially for the female founder who's maybe got this amazing technical idea, but how do you get the people on board with it, to bring the people with the money? How do you get that minimum viable product in the hands of people who can give you the right feedback, so you can really now go out into the world and sell this stuff, not just to the investors, but to the consumers? So how did you make that little leap right there?
That is a great question. And I get asked that too. You're an engineer, you do marketing. And actually, I do tech marketing. So to be specific, I market technology products, which means you have to learn how to talk about very technical things to very technical people. But there's still that art of building. I consider myself this builder of words, because how you communicate with people, like you said, you can be the smartest engineer, but if you can't communicate the value, if you can't have that conversation, your value could stay limited. Not always, but you very much have to have that ability. So I look at myself as that translator in between technology and business, which is an important role, which, by the way, I don't think AI is going to replace anytime soon, because
No, I
there's,
really don't think so.
it's a very hard skill to understand the core of the technology, to talk about it, and to communicate value. It was a natural transition. I first started product management, which is also, my core ended up in product marketing, but there's also the other side of that, which is product management. So between those two things, those are fairly technical roles if you're looking at kind of infrastructure and technical companies. So it's very different than brand marketing and design. There's this whole aspect that it's not always really well understood. When people think marketing, they think pictures and websites and
Right,
and
and
you
color
know
schemes, and
colors. And
yeah.
gosh, I know a good design when I see it, but I can't even use Photoshop. But
Yeah.
the point is that I
I
understand the
recommend
product.
Canva, actually.
Yes, yes. Or I do a pretty knockout job. I am a PowerPoint power user, or Google Slides, as it will. But it is in the Valley where I've spent most of my career. It is a very common role, and I've hired dozens of product marketers, which is when I've been a CMO. So looking for people who have, it's a very different person who's a demand gen, creating ad campaigns and such, to someone who is talking about the product and talking about it to the audience. You have to have some technical knowledge to build that rapport and to actually build that conversation. And that's what product marketers and product managers do.
That's awesome. So I mentioned a short list of companies that you've worked with, and many of them are very large and well known. What are some of the smaller ones that you've worked with?
It's interesting because some of them got acquired, some of them are no longer around, and most of them people would never have heard of. I worked for a company that started out in the Valley, then they ultimately got by Intel. I bought a company, or I worked for a company. It was a very small team with just basically the engineering founder and a few other engineers and me, that got acquired by VMware. So that's another,
Nice.
if I said their names now, one was
Like,
called Gamma Link.
yeah.
Gamma Link got bought by Dialogic, got bought by Intel. Thinstall got bought by VMware. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Embarcadero Technologies, I think is now, I forget the name. I want to say Idera is the name. Things shift, but there's smaller companies. Like I even started my own company and actually won the first Google Android competition with my techie partner at the time. So
Look at
that
you
was,
go.
yeah, so that was again, as the CEO and my partner was the CTO, we had to do pitching. We actually went through the whole Astia program to which is a program that helps women entrepreneurs get funding and learn how to run a company. So that's a really fun one too. But I'll stop there. But there's so
Yeah.
many other little
Well,
companies
question,
dabbled in.
Astio, are they still around? Have they changed or morphed, or is this a resource that other women could reach out to use
Yes,
still?
absolutely. Astia, Astia. If you are a female founder, please, absolutely. In fact, I still look at some of the companies that come through there as being on their advisory board. So yeah, they're still around and they're still very active. So please, yes,
Yes,
good
excellent.
resource.
Because it's always good to have resources that you can go to, connections that can be made,
Yes.
because that's one of the things I think where we as women come up a little bit short when we go into this world of founding companies and trying to make our mark on the world this way. The guys are trained to automatically build that mentoring, sponsorship network in their world. And as women, we are typically raised to see each other as competition
Hmm.
instead of possible collaborators. So, yeah, it's sometimes a little bit of a mental shift to start to make to build that. So, I'm super pleased to find resources and places where we can hook up and start to build those positive connections that help the guys so effortlessly.
Yeah, yeah. There's resources for the guys, but I feel like, yeah, as women, we do have to work a little harder to find them, but they're there. And I don't, I also have to emphasize, do not overlook men as your mentors. They
Yeah.
actually are people who can open doors. And there's so many men who I've run into in my career
Who
who
are
have
great
been
allies.
tremendous
Yeah.
allies. Yes. And I can say I've run into both men and women who have been not helpful at all. So
Oh, yeah,
there's the
exactly.
way it goes both ways, but find those people, nurture, and be very gracious with them because they want to do it. So you'll know those people when you come across them. Don't
Absolutely.
keep
I
them
love
close.
that.
Yeah.
We're up on our first break already. I know it goes so fast. So, what I'd like to do is invite everyone out there who's joining us today. Take a few minutes as we go through this commercial break. Go to leadershippitfallquiz.com. Go take it really quick so you've got your result. When we come back, we're going to discuss not just allies, which is what we just referred to, but we'll also discuss her results from the Leadership Pitfall quiz. And I'm really looking forward to that. So hang with us through the break and we'll be right back.
Oh, check it out, we're here. Tech is ours and we show no fear. No fear. No fear. No fear.
Welcome back from the break. Thanks for hanging in with us. This is Zofia Morales, and I am still here with Rosie Pongracz. And so, Rosie, I know you had an opportunity to take the Leadership Pitfall quiz. Do you remember what your result was? What was your animal?
Golden Retriever.
Golden Retriever. Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. And one of the things I know with my Golden Retrievers is we have a tendency as a Golden Retriever to say yes to a few too many things. Does that resonate with you, first
Oh,
of all?
yeah, it totally
Yeah.
resonates. I am not good at saying no, especially in a professional sense.
So, how have you learned to cope with that predisposition to say yes to a few too many things?
It's funny. I can't say that I've always cooked well. It definitely took me many years to learn that
Yes,
because
we learn the hard way
we
typically.
we learned the hard way. And I remember when I was interviewing some man, I love to hire women. They always work so much harder. And that honestly, just hearing that from a guy, I was like, I know I've always worked really hard. And at some point, health or whatever kind of makes other things makes
Yeah.
you stand up and
Well,
notice.
and
So
that's a lot of the times the things that will make you reevaluate is, you know what, I am going through burnout, I'm breaking down, I'm getting really sick. what is the cause of this?
And I think part of it is setting expectations. You have to sit down with your boss. It could be CEO, or if you're an individual contributor, it could be just your boss, and saying, I'd say look to what their priorities are is one of them. So get rid of things that aren't important to your boss. That would be my biggest thing that I learned, is you've got to make them look good. So always be as little to manage as possible, and always understand their priorities, because that helps you focus yours. So that was one thing that, that took me a while to learn, to be honest.
Do you
Yeah.
struggle with perfectionism? I know that's
Oh,
one of the things I'm
yes.
recovering from.
Yes, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And especially as I grew into managing teams, which I've done for, gosh, almost 2 decades now, you really do have to delegate and let go. And that is hard. I've seen that especially in a lot of young managers. And when I'm mentoring young managers, you have to let things fall on the floor. You have to let things fail. And then you have to be still, kind, and again, helping them, your team, set priorities. And so that's another thing, though, because I would find myself often going, that's not the right
That's
thing
not
or
how
the
I
right
would
thing
do
to
it.
do.
Yeah.
And it's not the how, it's the what. Let them, but you have to be, that forces you to be very clear and articulate with your goals. And that's another thing that,
and spelling out what
helps.
success looks like, right?
That's right. That's right. Here is the metrics, and what are we measured on as a company, as a team, and you as an individual, and getting very clear about that has helped.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. That's an amazing learning. And I love that you brought up the octopus, which is what I call the micromanager who's in there telling everybody exactly how it has to happen.
Oh, yeah.
They're real candidates for burnout as well,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and their
So,
team doesn't have fun either. And that's
yeah.
something that you really have to look to, is how does your team perceive you, or what inspires them?
Yeah. And how did they feel about their interactions with you?
That's right. That's right.
I love that. So let's talk a minute about allies. We brought that up a little bit before the break. And I know from my own experience being the only woman at the table, a lot of the times, I didn't a lot of times have the luxury of looking for a female mentor or a female sponsor. And so I had to learn to identify male allies who could help me move my career forward. So tell me a little bit about your own experience with learning to identify allies. Were you pretty good at it? Did you have any failures?
It's always easy to identify, or I should say, you can be suspicious of people to identify those who are not going to help you. So sometimes that's obvious, but again, sometimes it's not. So for identifying people who you work with, you feel you have to have a good rapport. You have to have mutual respect. You have to have someone who, and I have a great story of someone who came in to a company as like a senior VP, and I was on the team, and he immediately fired my manager, and we were all on the team, taken aback.
Wow.
But then
Yeah.
he had to repair all that, but he made the extra effort to sit down with folks, and he actually said, look, I'm newish to this, and I really want to know and learn from your experience how to do this, how to about the team, about the product, about the marketing. And immediately that garnered my attention, because I'm like, wow, this person's not really a jerk. Yes, he did this thing that was perceived as bad, but he is very truly interested. He always deferred to people on his team as experts. So that person to this day is still a mentor who I call when I have a question or need a referral or something, a reference. But it's someone who respects you, someone who asks questions, someone who talks at you on the same level. There's so many people who are really ready to tell you stuff and talk down. But when you identify someone who asks about you and engages with you and starts to ask for your expertise, then you know you have someone who's authentically interested and cares, and nurture that person and ask, be vulnerable with them too. Like, I need your opinion on how to work this situation or something. So you can, when you're both vulnerable, you can, and sometimes you have to be resilient enough to go, okay, that didn't work. That person is still a jerk. But I'd say more times than not, when you have that gut spidey sense, you're probably found someone who you can be vulnerable with and you can start to build trust with.
Yeah. And it's interesting. What do I want to say? that person-to-person interaction sometimes versus how they're, what do I want to say, perceived by the wider world. Because one of my best bosses and mentors that I had when I was corporate, there was this phenomenon that we called fear of Jack. And I never was fearful to go to him and talk to him about this is going on or that's going on, or I've got this challenge and I could do this or I could do that, and help me think it through. He was always fabulous for that sort of thing. And I learned a lot of amazing stuff for him. But the thing that I noticed is if I was interacting with someone outside of the department, and I would say, okay, we're not reaching an agreement here that's working for both parties, I might have to have a conversation with Jack or engage him and see how we can shake this loose. Everything would immediately shift because they did not want him involved.
Yep.
I think it had to do with the fact that he had this incredible persuasiveness that he would contact their manager, and the next thing you know, they are being told that they will comply, right? And so there was a certain fear of having him involved because it probably wasn't going to go well for them, even though he was never like an asshole or a jerk to anyone, because that's not how you change minds and win hearts. But yeah, I always found that dichotomy really intriguing.
Yeah. And if you, how to work with people like that and their unique power or presence or, however, their skill set, there's all of those play into the respect or fear or whatever,
however you
they're
want
perceived.
to call it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you look back on some of the best mentors and allies that you had, what were some of the early signs that you had found somebody you were going to be able to work with?
Another mentor that I had, and was a woman, and again, still someone I'm in touch with to this day. Early on, I was interviewing, and we had gotten to the point where I'd interviewed with a few people on the team, and this was a small, no longer existent company. But the CEO was like, I don't think she has the right skills. She doesn't have these deep database skills. And this woman who was my boss was like, you know what? I think she has enough skills. I know she's smart enough to learn. I'm going to hire her anyways. I was like, wow, that woman went to bat for me, barely knowing me. And when it worked out, like I got the job, I did well at the company. And again, she was a lifelong mentor. So someone in that case who immediately was like, I'm going to do what I think is right because I am strong enough. And that type of person too. Wow, that's a keeper.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. What were some early signs that maybe someone wasn't going to be a good mentor or an ally? What are some of the red flags?
Let me think. So red flags, it's definitely someone who's more interested in their own success and their own perception. And it's that you pick up on that I pick up on it very quickly when someone's so self-involved or so all about themselves that they don't want to give you the time. And again, that's something that you can see in just how someone interacts with you. Are they respectful? Something as simple as keeping meetings, something as simple as setting up one-on-ones and keeping them. You'd be surprised how many people, everything else is more important. And you're like, this is how they treat me. So I've gone after a few mentors, even corporate kind of systemic, where they're organizing, hey, this person's here and you're here and this is a great mentor. And you could always tell that person was not that authentically interested. So sometimes I always, when corporate people set something up, I don't always buy it. Honestly, in the big companies I've been at, it's been more who you can find along the way. And I've had that happen in a couple of the bigger companies that you really have to find your people.
Yeah.
If you're assigned someone, it's not always going
to be a good,
and you feel like they're fulfilling an obligation if they even do that. So
yeah, exactly. I know when I was in corporate, I spent a lot of time, what do I want to say, putting myself in the position to meet people. So I could start to feel out who would be good to ask questions of, who might be supportive. And I cast a pretty broad net myself. It wasn't just the people in my department, but I would hit the smoking deck. I don't smoke.
Yeah.
So I would stand upwind, but shoot the shit with the people who are out there on the balcony. And I would get to talk to people who were in risk management and in audit and some of these other things that were not directly computer operations, change management, that impacted what was happening in my world. And it allowed me to get like a broader picture, first of all, of where we fit into the scheme of things. But it also gave me like this set of resources that I could reach out to. It's, hey, this memo came down and I'm a little confused about why they want to do this. And so, how do I convince my team it's important? And have those kind of conversations, because a lot of times stuff will come down and it's, boy, they didn't think a bit about how that affects us.
That is so true, especially in big companies. You've got to reach way beyond your immediate group and even immediate physical location nowadays, because most corporations are just multinational, multiple locations. We're all remote. But you got to really, it's work. You got to make the effort to reach out, to find those people. Like you said, you didn't smoke, but you went out because that's where some of the people were.
Yeah,
and
that's where they congregated. So
yeah, and you got to put yourself in those situations. I'm lucky in marketing, it really lends itself to being an integrative force. Like you're bringing together technical people and creating business messages. I worked a ton with salespeople over the years, and that really, you really do learn to immediately talk to people. And if they fit, again, identifying you as a confidant, someone to run ideas off of, or just a peer who can be an ally, who can help you say, hey, I'm having this issue with this person over here. What do you do? And those are all so important, but you've got to put yourself out there, and not everything's going to be a hit. Not everyone's going to be a connection, and that's okay.
I would do a lot of like history mining, right? Because this company been around a long time. I'm like, has anybody tried to do this before? I think it'd be a really good idea. And then I would get back all of this mountain of information on previous initiatives that direction that had failed and why they blew up and all this kind of stuff. And it's okay. And so you can do two things with that mountain of data. You can go, oh, this will never work. Or you can go, okay, I see where we went wrong in the past. Let's do it better this time. Right. Yeah. Okay, I love this. We are up on our next break already, and I wanted to talk about so much more stuff like remote and how you build relationships remote, and how do you keep from being that faceless person that's abused on the other end of the email. Right. So I guess we'll take that up after the break. If you've joined us here and you have not had a chance to take the Leadership Pitfall Quiz yet, I would invite you to go to leadershippitfallquiz.com and get your result in just a couple of seconds, and get some insights into your leadership style and perhaps directions you could go and things you could modify to make your leadership experience more enjoyable and more effective. So hang with us. We'll be right back from the break.
Oh, shout it loud, but we'll hear. Tech is ours and we show no fear. No fear. No fear. No fear.
Thanks for hanging in with us through the break. This is Zofia Morales, and I am here with Rosie Pongracz, and we have been discussing all kinds of wonderful things: technology, corporate, startup, management, all the things. And we talked briefly about working remote. I know you have some experience with that. I had a fair amount of experience with that because when I was in corporate, it was a global corporation. So a lot of times you're working with people in other states, in other countries, in other cultures. And one of the things I found when I was doing this was, while I remained faceless, I was very easy to abuse. I would get nasty ass emails and vicious phone calls. And what I found was the more I could humanize myself, and my favorite trick was inviting them to the data center, because that makes you the most human you can possibly be, really diffused that for me. What has been your experience with working remote?
Oh gosh, I learned this early on because I worked for a German company and all the engineers were in Germany. This was even pre-email. So we were get up in the morning and have faxes. Gosh, I think that dates me, but anyway.
Faxes and phone calls, yes.
Faxes and phone calls, a lot. As you stated, there's nothing that can replace breaking bread, having dinner, having a one-on-one in person with someone. And I feel like you have to always establish that. Now, more recently, in the days of remote, everything's remote video and you're talking head on a camera, I've managed a team at the last position I was CMO at where I hadn't met some of the people in person. And I do find that really a challenge. I think it's really important to be able to come together regularly,
Yeah.
even if, your company can't really afford it, which was the case with a small one, but you've got to at least have some team gatherings regularly. And we had our executive team get together, the sub teams that we manage, like my marketing team, not so much. Even if you have that once that you connect with someone in person, it does make it easier to not treat someone like an asshole and to actually garner that respect or to have that confrontation with them one-on-one. Hey, why this? So I don't know if there's any way around it. We're humans. We're made to be in person, and don't ever undervalue that or accept that as wherever you're working at. You've got to somehow be able to come together with your folks.
Yeah,
so,
it makes such a huge difference. I
huge
found
yeah.
the more communication channels that could be engaged, the friendlier it got. If
Yes.
I'd had Zoom would have been such a
Right.
lifesaver.
Faxes, like
Just the fact that they know what you look like makes a
Yes.
difference.
Oh, totally. Yeah. In the days before, international was so much harder. But yeah, I made quite a few trips to Germany. So there you go. And that helped tremendously.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now. What's your jam?
What's my jam? I took some time off. So I was in between my CMO role, and I had some personal things to take care of. Like we were talking about health, really important, my elderly parents. So getting that on track, and I'm consulting now. So I have basically part-time project work that's tech marketing. And honestly, as a senior tech marketer, it's a pretty good gig for now. That's what I'm doing. I also have my hands involved in so many other things for networking, for one of my newest hobbies, I should say. So I'm exploring some of those other things. Like I just started I am now in Sonoma County, which is about an hour north of San Francisco. So having spent so much time there in the city, I wanted to build more of a tech community up here. So I've started Sonoma AI Plus Wine, which is a meetup where we not only want to bring together technologists who work remotely here, but also just savor the wonderful wine and food that we have here in wine country. So that's one of the things that I'm working on.
Beautiful.
And then I'm on the board at NumFocus, which is a very important, I give a plug for NumFocus, open source, open science, all these foundational to AI data, I'd say data manipulation type of projects that are open source are kind of artifacts of science that has to deal with really big numbers like geophysics or astrophysics or biophysics. Yes, anything with a lot of data. These are foundational.
Anything that requires matrix math.
That are projects that have evolved into key open source projects that really are data science, foundational data science projects for all the AI that's going on. So I'm on the board there, and that's a really important work to keep doing that. And then I also have some other little things that I'm working on that I could tell you about too.
I have a more personal question. Going back to you've been in the C-suite for more than a minute. And I know a lot of women, there is this tension between the caretaking needs of having a close personal relationship, having a family, having whether it's parents or kids or what it is, and devoting the time and attention to your career that it requires to do things like break into the C-suite. And I think there's a perception that there's such a dedication that you have to choose one or the other. What's been your experience with that?
Just say I've always taken my vacations.
Good for you.
Yes, I'd say start with that. Do not drive yourself into the ground. And I can't say that I haven't. I've had some of those health issues over the years. I don't even have kids. I was taking care of my parents, but you have to, again, go back to what are your boss's priorities? What are the impact you can make? And you don't have to kill yourself. You just have to deliver. So think through how you deliver. And the hard work is so ingrained in me. I'm first generation, is that right? First generation immigrant. My dad immigrated. And so it's like hard work gets you everywhere. And sometimes that isn't your friend. So when you start taking a step back and engineer it, reverse engineer the success to what makes your boss or your company successful, and do that. Look at it truly through that lens versus how hard can I work versus what are the most important things that I need to do to move the needle for my job, for my boss, for my company.
I
So,
like that. I have an exercise I do when I get into these moments of overwhelm and meltdown. It's okay, I've got to reevaluate. And I do a thing I call stop, drop, or plop.
Yes.
And if it's not necessary, I stop doing it. If I don't have to do it, then I drop it on someone else.
Yep.
Or no, I plop it on someone else, or I drop it completely. If no one
Yeah.
really needs to be doing this, why are we doing it? Just whack it off the list. So stop,
That's
drop,
right.
or plop.
That's right. That's right. And know, and the other thing I learned is know when to get into the details, know just enough, but don't feel like you have to do everything. And it's hard. It's hard at smaller companies because you do get caught up in the, you have
Yeah.
to be a doer. Yeah.
And you get a pile of hats. It's
And-
not like one hat. It's here
That's
are
right.
the 6 things we need you to do related to marketing.
And have really, if the people on your team aren't the ones, that's one thing I learned in a painful way is if you come in as an executive, you truly have to make sure that there are no, that you're going to have the ability to swap out chairs, swap out people, swap out roles. And I say that with painful experience because some just know the culture of the company and say, look, if this isn't the right person and we need to do this instead of that, make your plan, do the 90 days or whatever, 6 weeks is sometimes people will accept, and reformulate what your team looks like. Don't be afraid to kindly swap out people. You don't have to let go of people in a mean or all the terrible email and impersonal ways we hear, but think about it as you're doing them a favor as much as yourself. And
Exactly. But
yeah,
Jack always told me we will release them to pursue something that suits them better.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you have to, and if your company, for whatever reason, it's like the founder's best friend, or you have some weird HR policy, like find that shit out. The bold.
Well, and here's the thing, right? Getting someone off your team is not always about firing them. Sometimes
That's
it's
right.
about finding them a more suitable opportunity elsewhere.
That's right.
And that way you make fewer enemies.
That's right. I mean, that's right. Like I said, there's no reason why it has to be. Sometimes it is. There's no way around it. But a lot of times it's just, it's better for everyone. And it can be a very kind and not happy.
A supportive transition.
A supportive transition. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yes.
I love that. So I know we're going to have links and stuff in the description for you. So anyone who wants to connect with Rosie can certainly go below to reach out and connect with her. But I believe you brought a gift with you today for the listeners.
Yes, yes. If you are, I do tech marketing. I have a website, and on there, I think you have the link that will let people reach me, and I'll do a short kind of go to market consultation.
Nice.
No obligation, no cost, but if you have a product, if you're thinking of a product, if you just don't know what marketing does and you want to understand, happy to spend some time walking through that with other entrepreneurs.
That is a very wonderful and expansive invitation, because so often these things are, oh, I'll do this great consult with you, but then if you turn out not to be a client, I'm going to cut it off early. I had one of those like last week. It's really, really, that's interesting. Okay, moving on. So it gives me a fresh appreciation for what you've just extended to the listeners.
Awesome.
In the last 60 seconds or so, what would be your words of advice to someone who's a female founder, thinking about being a female founder, or even stepping into that C-suite, because they're all this really intense leadership role?
I would say revel in your uniqueness. Everybody, your skill set, everything that you do, you've learned. And that's a marketing challenge. How do you package yourself? How do you talk about yourself? What's your uniqueness that you can bring to the company, to whatever you're doing? And create your own path. Find your mentors, find your people, and don't be afraid to create your own path and define success in your own way.
I love that. Thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation with you. I don't even have words of wisdom I can follow on that right now. It's just I've always been for embracing who you are. That's part of the reason I called this thing STEM and Stilettos, because why do we have to be this dowdy, scientific, unattractive thing that we've been told we should be to blend in with the guys? No, let's rock that thing. I always wore my stiletto heels into the office.
I did too. I have so
Even
many
when
pairs
I
of
was
shoes.
doing inventory.
That's right. Yeah, I know. Me too. I have so many great pairs of shoes. Absolutely. Wear those shoes and be proud of them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I've really appreciated my time with you. And thank you, listeners, everyone who's joined us here today. I really appreciate you taking your time out to spend some time with us on this conversation. My sincerest hope is that it is helpful to you, that you've gained an insight or two that will help you forward on your path. And until next week, go out, be bold, and be yourself.